All right, guys, real quick bonus midweek video here. If you've been following along with the paddle shifter series, you'll see that we got paddle shifters installed on my '08 Charger. And the way we got those to function is using the Z Automotive transformer. With that transformer, it has an option called steering wheel shifting. And what that does is allow the plus and minus volume buttons on the steering wheel to control shifting when an auto stick. So the paddles are wired directly to the volume buttons. So when you're an auto stick with steering wheel shift enabled, paddle shifters work. I realized I kind of brushed over the problem of guys with no steering wheel controls. How do you get paddle shifters to work? So I thought I'd make a little video, try to explain it to the best of my knowledge on the wiring part of the paddle shifters. Now, if you need to know how to physically attach them, I've got 2 videos already on that, so go back and check those out. And it covers everything you need to know about physically attaching the paddles to the wheel. As far as wiring goes, now, to the best of my knowledge, this is going to apply to '05 to '07 models with no steering wheel controls. When you get into the '08 and up cars, I don't think this is an option, but you know how car manufacturers are with mid-year stuff, and I think the cruise control situation was different on '08 up cars, stuff like that. So if you got an '08 and up with no steering wheel controls, which I don't even know if that's an option to not have the steering wheel switches on '08 and up cars, this may not apply to you. The thing you need to look for is once you remove the steering wheel and airbag, you look at your clock spring. There's 2 variations of clock springs on these cars. So for sure, '05 to '07 Magnums, 300s, and '06 to '07 Chargers, this applies to you. On your clock spring, you will have a 2-pin connector above the main harness that comes out of the clock spring. This is unused, and then there's 2 pins, and that's what you'll use to run wires from your paddle shifters through those 2 pins in the clock spring. Now, you'll have 2 more wires remaining from your paddle shifters, and those 2 will go to your main harness, your main clock spring harness, and you'll use that as your ground. On that harness, on the clock spring, it's the red wire. Now, once that harness plugs into the steering wheel harness, it changes to a white with green wire. And I actually have, I can show you right there, white with green wire. That's your ground wire right there. And on the other side of the connector where it plugs into the clock spring, it's going to be red. But it's probably easier to tap into this side, the steering wheel harness. So what you'll do is you take your 2 non-signal wires, wire them together to that wire, and that's your ground. Now, as far as which wire is which on the paddle shifters, it doesn't matter. This paddle shifter is simply a momentary switch that completes a circuit. So you can use either wire from each side for your signal and either wire from each side as your ground. You choose. So now we have our ground to that white with the green striped wire. 2 signal wires will go to those 2 pins on the clock spring. You'll have to figure out some kind of female pin that will slide over the male pins coming out of the clock spring, and a way to hold them there, unless you can source some kind of connector that will connect into that slot. Most likely, you'll just have to find a female pin, slide over. So that's the steering wheel side of wiring. Now, on the back side of things, you'll have to remove your steering wheel at this point, clock spring, and then the column assembly with the turn signal stalk. That will have to come off. And there's plenty of videos on how to remove that stuff out there. Once you do all that, on the back, what's left on the steering column, there will be your steering control module 14-pin connector. And all that connector, slots 5 and 6 are what correspond with the 2 empty pins on the clock spring. So essentially, those 2 empty pins on the clock spring, they will transmit through the steering control module and then plug into 5 and 6 on the steering control module plug that's on the steering column. Slots 5 and 6 on that connector are empty. So you'll also have to source female plugs for that connector. And the best thing I can say is junkyard. Go to the junkyard, cut that whole connector off, take it home, de-pin 2 of the pins so you can slide those into the steering control module plug that's on the steering column. At this point, you're going to have to determine what wire is what. So basically, you'll have your 2 wires from your paddle shifters into the clock spring. Then you have your 2 wires coming out of the steering control module plug on the steering column. As far as what pin goes to 5 and 6 on the clock spring, I don't know. You'll have to figure that out, so you know which ones shift up and which ones shift down. So at this point, you have your paddle shifters installed on the steering wheel. You have one wire from each paddle shifter to the white with green stripe wire on the steering wheel harness. You'll have the other 2 wires from the paddle shifters, which will be your shift up and shift down signals, pinned to the empty slot on the clock spring. Then on the steering control module plug that's on the column, you'll have 2 more wires coming out of that. And those 2 wires need to go down to your shifter. And what you're gonna have to do is take your shift knob off, take the center console completely out to access the shifter. There's a module down there for the auto stick functions. That module has 3 wires that connect to it: a black, a blue, and a yellow. Black you do not use. Blue is your shift down, yellow is your shift up. And all you have to do is tap your 2 wires coming out of the steering control module plug down to those 2 wires. And that's why I say it's important to determine which wire is your shift up and which wire is your shift down. Then that's it. When in auto stick, you should be able to use the paddles to shift. Now I know about the ground wires from your paddles. I've also read a guy, he said that he just literally ground those to the steering wheel frame inside, and that allowed him to shift. So that's an option, but I can't guarantee that's going to work. Everybody else said they used white wire with green stripe as their ground. So it's a fairly simple wiring job. Obviously you have to source female pins for the clock spring and female pins for the steering wheel control module plug on the column. Other than that, it's just wires. 2 wires from the column down to your shifter. Okay, I think I covered everything I can cover on the paddle shifters. At this point, there's probably no more information out there that you would need to put paddle shifters in 05 to 10 LX cars. So your Chargers, your Challengers, Magnums, and 300s. 11 and up stuff, totally different. None of this will apply. Now I promise this is the last paddle shifter video. Go to the playlist on my channel. All these videos will be there. There's tons of information. I don't think there's anything else I can cover. All right, I hope that helps you guys with the non-steering wheel controls. I know I had some people asking, well, what do I do? There you go. Sorry I can't show you physically on how to do it, but I just don't have the means to do it since my car has the steering wheel controls and it's an '08, so it has the other clock spring. But hopefully it helps. All right, that's it. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you haven't, and we'll see you on the next one.